Tax cuts and credits have been a popular theme during this campaign. Former President Trump's latest proposal is ending a cap on the federal deductions taxpayers get for paying state and local taxes, a cap he implemented as president, and a change that could cost more than $1 trillion over a decade. Both candidates have also proposed several tax breaks and have not always explained how to pay for them. That's true of one idea Trump and Vice President Harris support: no taxes on tips. Economics correspondent Paul Solomon looked at what's behind that proposal and some concerns around it.
Prince Chickasaw, bartender at Busboys and Poets in Washington, D.C., 80 to 90% of his income from tips.
Suppose they were no longer taxed.
That would be great.
No taxes on tips. It was a proposal first floated by former President Trump in June.
When I get to office, we are going to not charge taxes on tips.
Vice President Harris adopted the idea in August.
When I am president, we will continue our fight for working families of America, including to raise the minimum wage and eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
On Capitol Hill, don't tax tips bills were introduced this summer with bipartisan support.
What's the average tip you get?
Anywhere between 15 and 20.
For most Americans, a standard tip at a sit-down restaurant is 15% or less.
Who are the big tippers?
Families, parents who have kids, they tip really well.
Most people tip me 20%, which is awesome.
Server Jordan Colsani says tips account for about 80% or more of her income.
What would your reaction be if tips were no longer taxed?
I think every penny counts. So I think making more and, not being taxed and being able to keep all the money that you work really, really hard for is always a positive.
And what do the tippers themselves think?
Them being able to keep that amount and not having to, repay it later is something that I do stand with.
Will that change your behavior at all?
It won't. I'm happy to hear that they'll take more of it.
So, a policy with bipartisan support that benefits the low-wage worker. What's not to like?
Can I get a fruit cup?
As I discovered, plenty.
The issue is that there aren't a lot of tipped workers in America.
According to economist Ernie Tedeschi, tipped work accounts for just 2.5% of all employment.
Even among low-wage workers, it's only 5% of the lowest wage workers that are tipped workers.
And more than a third of the lowest wage workers don't have to pay any federal income tax, says policy analyst Erica York.
These are workers who already have a very low income tax burden if they owe taxes at all. They may not make enough to owe taxes. If they do, they face the lowest marginal tax rates. They qualify for tax credits that can offset some or all of that tax liability. So providing an exemption like this may not even be the best form of relief.
But whereas the very lowest wage workers wouldn't benefit much or at all, says Ernie Tedeschi, employers would.
It shifts the burden of compensation away from the wage side, which the employers have to pay, to the tip side, which the customer pays.
So if tips were tax-free,
there are going to be a lot more workers that want tipped jobs, and so that's going to give employers the comfort and the ability to pay those workers a little bit less in wages than they otherwise would.
As it is, post-pandemic, there's been a proliferation of electronic prompts for tips.
Every single coffee shop I go to, every single fast food place I go to asks for tips.
We're being asked now to tip for stuff that we never used to tip on before.
It's like a guilt factor where it's kind of like, you just go ahead and I might as well do it at this moment.
So you are susceptible to the guilt?
Yes, I definitely am. The guilt does get the best of me and just act on it, yeah.
You too?
Yeah, I'd say it's 100% guilt-driven.
Phil DeRuggiero, for one, may be among those developing tip fatigue.
A little bit tired of getting that at every point of sale.
And since the proposal incentivizes tipping,
I think that's going to become more pervasive if this becomes law.
Which could lead to unintended changes in consumer behavior.
I think that there is a default assumption that consumers are just going to pay tips at the same rate that they've always been paying. I don't know that that's going to be the case. I think at some point consumers might get exhausted. You're essentially asking customers to pay higher prices when they've already gone through a period of 4 years where they've rebelled against higher prices.
And as Steve Buscemi's Mr. Pink made clear in Reservoir Dogs, tips are discretionary.
I don't tip.
You don't tip?
No, I don't believe in it.
You don't believe in tipping?
If they really put forth the effort, I'll give them something extra. But I mean, it's tipping automatically. It's for the birds.
And how about this unintended consequence?
You could see a lot of income recharacterized to take advantage of the tax-free treatment. It's hard to predict how many industries, how many occupations could find a way to involve tipping in the transaction.
Let's say I'm a salesperson that gets a commission, or let's say that I'm somebody on Wall Street that gets a year-end bonus. So I reclassify my commission as a tip, or I reclassify my year-end bonus as a tip. The employer helps out because they'll get a benefit. And so everybody wins.
Except the taxpayer.
Well, right, exactly. Except for the taxpayer and the federal government. That's the sort of creative tax accounting that's on the line here if we don't have good guardrails. And, you know, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. Now imagine what an actual smart accountant and an actual smart lawyer who's paid to do this 24/7 would come up with.
Now, the Harris campaign says she would push for an income limit and strict requirements to prevent such behavior. But here's yet another problem. Even when it comes to the low-income workers the plan is supposed to help,
there's not really an economic rationale to say a waitress who's making $30,000 a year deserves a tax cut, while a cashier at a convenience store who's also making $30,000 a year doesn't deserve a tax cut.
New York restaurateur Amanda Cohen eliminated tips 10 years ago. Instead, she charges a bit more so she can pay all her employees a higher wage. More fair, she thinks.
The prettier you are, younger you are, the more likely you are to make higher tips. And, you know, the older you are and the darker your skin, you're less likely to make as much.
But Cohen may have to drop her no-tip policy if tips are going to be untaxed.
How do I look at my servers and say, you know, you could make a lot more money working at a tipped restaurant because half of your wages won't be taxed anymore? I just don't think I could find anybody to work for me.
So with all these caveats, why has the proposal been so readily embraced?
No tax on tips. It sounds like a good way to provide a tax cut to workers who work hard, who earn income, who need a break. I think that's why it's catching on politically.
This proposal is extremely popular in Nevada, which is heavily dominated by the leisure and hospitality and gaming industry, as you might imagine, where tips are extremely important.
And Nevada is a swing state.
And Nevada is a swing state, exactly.
In other words, political business as usual.
People that get tips, you're going to be very happy.
In Soundbite America. For the PBS NewsHour, Paul Salman.